perhaps the most brilliantly original and morally complex of all Northern European religious painters. Bosch is most immediately associated with works with a disturbingly vivid, dreamlike quality. Though only an estimated 25 original works exist, the nightmarish iconography in his paintings is instantly recognizable as Boschian and has become a staple of the genre of the grotesque. But while his status as an iconoclast is beyond doubt, some historians have suggested that the artist was a deeply conservative figure who, rather than being of distressed mind, proved equally capable of being subtle and complemented his grotesque images with fine decorative and devotional pieces that embodied his strongly held Christian principles. Hieronymus Anthonissen van Aken was born sometime between 1450–56. His date of birth remains a matter of speculation but has been estimated from a self-portrait dated around 1508 to Antonius van Aken and his wife, Aleid van der Minnem. He was born in his grandfather's prosperous household in the affluent and culturally and intellectually rich town of Ecce Homo of the Duchy of Brabant, located in the Low Regions of the Netherlands. His grandfather, Johannes Thomaszoon van Aken, was amongst the most important painters in early 15th century Ecce-Hertogenbosch, and in the words of the art historian Stefan Fischer, created a painter dynasty of 5 children, 4 of whom became painters, including Antonius. Little else is known about Bosch's early years apart from the fact that in 1463 some 4,000 houses in Ecce-Hertogenbosch were destroyed by a catastrophic fire. As art historian Claire Selvin put it, it is believed that the artist bore witness to this disaster, which was perhaps one of the most devastating events of his early life. It's possible that the catastrophic incident influenced Bosch's later works, some of which include blazes raging in the background. The young Hieronymus later adopted the name Bosch, pronounced Bos in Dutch, as tribute to his hometown that was known locally as Den Bosch, the forest. Next to nothing is known of his training, since he left behind no notebooks, letters, books, or any other such artifact. However, in Ecce-Hertogenbosch town records dated 1475, Hieronymus is listed as a member of his father's workshop, and it is assumed, quite reasonably, that his father, and possibly one of his uncles, taught him to paint. This knowledge doesn't bring us any closer, however, to understanding the sources of Bosch's remarkable imagination. Ecce Homo, circa 1480, believed to be one of the artist's earliest paintings. Ecce Homo concerns an episode in the Passion of Jesus. The original version, with a provenance in collections in Ghent, is housed today in Frankfurt's Stedel Museum, while a copy is held at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The theme of Ecce Homo was not often taken up by painters before the Renaissance, and Bosch is one of the best-known early artists to take on the scene. The painting takes its title from the Latin words meaning, "Behold the man." spoken by the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate when Jesus is paraded before the angry mob in Jerusalem, shortly before he is sentenced to be crucified. Bosch presents Jesus as half-naked and cowering, as he is brought before the people by the Roman council members, who are flanked by soldiers. The crowd mocks and jeers Jesus, who wears a crown of thorns. His hands are bound with shackles, while the redness of the now raw flesh on his legs, hands and chest indicate that he was previously beaten with a scourge, as related in the Bible. The dialogue between Pilate and the mob is indicated by 3 Gothic inscriptions placed near the mouths of the protagonists. To Pilate's cry of Ecce Homo, the mob replies, Crucifige eum, crucify him. A 3rd inscription, Salve nos Christe Redemptor, save us, Christ Redeemer, can be seen in the lower left of the image, from the mouths of what were the representations of 2 donors, although they were later painted over. Characteristic of Bosch throughout his career, the painting teems with symbolic imagery. Most noteworthy is the placement of 2 of animals, traditionally regarded as emblems of evil in Christian iconography. An owl perched above Pilate and a giant toad seen resting on the shield of one of the soldiers. The upper right corner reveals an aesthetic cityscape of Jerusalem, more in keeping with the view of a late Gothic Netherlandish town. The large open spaces form a strong contrast to the densely packed and grotesque caricatures of the foreground mob, garbed in exotic clothes. Due to the relative simplicity of the figures and the similarity in content to other Bosch works painted during that time, Ecce Homo is generally believed to have been completed between 1475 to 80, as later confirmed by dendrochronological investigation of the oak panel. The image features many elements typical of Netherlandish painting, including homely faces and slight proportions of the figures, rendered flatly, while their physique fails to be substantial under heavy clothes. Between 1480–81, Bosch married a merchant's daughter named Aleid van der Merwene. Some years older than him, Aleid was heir to a generous inheritance, including a family property in the adjacent town of Oerschot, where the couple settled. It is thought that Bosch never traveled or strayed any further from the immediate area of his hometown. According to Salvin, through Fischer, Bosch benefited from the funds, land and status that came with the union, and he established his own workshop soon after the pair married. At this point in his life, Bosch became an artist in his own right, and he was poised to make meaningful connections with influential royal patrons. Indeed, a citation of his name and profession appears in S. Hertogenbosch's town records in 1486, listing him as insignis pictor, distinguished painter. One can speculate that because S. Hertogenbosch fell under the governance of the Roman Empire, it is likely that Bosch was fully conversant with the art of the Renaissance which was influencing the Flemish painters. Indeed, in 1488, which ages him around 40 years old, Bosch joined the Brotherhood of Our Lady, an archly conservative religious association made up of some 40 of Hertogen Bosch's most influential citizens, and a further 7,000 outer members scattered across Europe. The Brotherhood, for which Bosch's father had once acted as artistic advisor, was devoted to the Virgin and was widely respected throughout Catholic Europe. It is believed that some of the artist's first devotional commissions came through the Brotherhood, though it is not known for sure if any of these works have survived. Commenting on one of his earliest known works, Crucifixion with Saints and Donor, circa 1485-90, Fischer writes that, while it remains unknown where it was originally displayed, the painting, like many other devotional images of the period, was created to ensure salvation for the soul of the donor depicted kneeling at the foot of the cross. Crucifixion with Saints and Donor is something of an outlier in a body of work that favors eccentric, dizzying and disconcerting compositions, and Bosch would later project his idiosyncratic style onto various religious subjects. But, as art critic Tim Smith-Lang counters, for all the singularity of his work, there is no evidence to suggest that Bosch was, in any sense, an outsider. While some generously speculative research in the 1940s attempted to link him to an heretical sex cult called the Adamites, and while the 1960s zeitgeist had him hallucinating on ergotic wheat, mainstream academic opinion offers a much tamer picture. Nothing suggests that Bosch was anything other than a prominent, prosperous citizen, an Orthodox Catholic, and a devotional painter much in demand among patrons. Whereas other Northern European artists were also focused on producing biblical narratives, Bosch was interpreting the same subject matter in a way that was so peculiarly original, it fully jarred with the harmonious and dominant Flemish style. He filtered these stories through his imagination, transforming religious parables into extraordinary new fantasy worlds dense with absurdity and ecclesiastical symbolism. It was in his very loosely defined middle period that Bosch's iconic style, featuring contorted and distorted body shapes, vivid coloring, oversized and menacing foliage, and various devils and reptiles, starts to reveal itself through a series of pictures of saints. Pieces such as Saint Jerome at Prayer, circa 1485-90, Saint John the Baptist in Meditation, 1490, and an altarpiece, Saint John on Patmos, 1490-95, that was possibly commissioned by the Brotherhood of Our Blessed Lady. But it was his triptych of the Adoration of the Magi, 1494, that is often cited as his first true masterpiece. Commissioned by Peter Scheifer and Agnès de Gramme of Antwerp, the work, which shows the Mass of St. Gregory, effectively secured the artist's reputation, even if in later years it did not fit well with Bosch's brand recognition. As Smith-Lang noted, when Bosch died in 1516, he was already one of the best-known painters of his time. He soon became one of the most copied and imitated. By the 1530s, there had emerged an entire school of painters in Antwerp dedicated to exactly that. It is with them that Bosch's visionary image began to crystallize. The point Smith-Lang makes is that when modern marketing professionals took an interest in his work, they were talking about Bosch exclusively in terms of a purveyor of hellish diableries, and that stilly, sick, contemplative works such as the Adoration of the Magi went largely ignored. Saint Jerome at Prayer, circa 1482. Saint Jerome at Prayer is thought to have been completed circa 1482 and is currently housed at the Museum of Fine Arts in Ghent. The saint was a frequent subject of 15th century art, usually depicted in his studio or during his penitence in the desert. For his interpretation, Bosch adopts the latter iconography, presenting the saint as a long, thin figure hinting at his asceticism. Saint Jerome is praying with a crucifix in his arms, an unusual gesture of communion with Christ. Jerome lies against a rock under a shell-like cave, while surrounded by his traditional symbols, including the lion, the galero, broad-brimmed hat, and the Bible. Bosch, as is common in his works, also introduces several bizarre elements, such as the bony pig and the spherical shell emerging from the pool, perhaps as a symbol of the world floating towards decay. The large owl and small owl are depicted on a branch, alluding to heresy and the struggle against sacrilege. The Ten Commandments tables can be seen above the cave. The work is known only from its acquisition by the Ghent Museum in 1908. As for most of Bosch's paintings, dating has been long disputed, with years varying from 1490 to 1505. However, dendrochronologic analysis has proved that it has been painted before 1483. Christ carrying the cross. Bosch painted at least 3 versions of Christ carrying the cross throughout his career, the first of which was completed in the 1480s and is housed at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, Vienna. It is believed that the painting was once the left panel of a triptych, with the other 2 panels concerned scenes from the Passion. There are 2 narrative scenes taking place in the composition, with Christ in the upper section moving toward Calvary, bearing the cross, while in the lower section, the good and bad thieves, Christ's 2 fellow sufferers, have arrived. On the left, soldiers torment the bad thief, who appears to be counseled by an exotically dressed man in a red cloak with a strange cap and carrying a shield. On the right side, the good thief kneels before a priest, frantically taking his blessing in an intensity of confession, suggested by the open-mouthed profile, contrasting vividly with the passive response of the priest, who seems to suppress a yawn. The depiction of the priest is likely inspired by Bosch's own time spent at contemporary executions. The motif recurs in the great multi-figure Christ carrying the cross that Peter Bruegel the Elder was to paint almost a century later. Naturally, Christ forms the center of the panel, surrounded by a densely packed crowd that appears to mock and victimize him. A blue shield bearing the portrayal of a dying toad, limbs outstretched, predicts Christ's imminent death on the cross. Amidst the hostile mob, he endures his torturous journey alone. His suffering is heightened by the spike-studded wooden blocks dangling from his waist, cutting deeply into his feet and ankles with every step. This torture device was used in Bosch's day to increase the pain of criminals on the road to execution. In 1923, while a restorer was removing paint from the reverse side of the panel, An enigmatic Bosch figure was discovered for the first time in over 500 years. The image is often titled Christ Child with a walking frame, revealing a naked male child playing with a whirligig toy while walking with the aid of a wooden walking frame. Interpretation of the image has been much contested in recent years, with some believing that the child is a symbol of folly for those that fail to recognize the meaning of Christ's suffering and fail to live life as one of his followers. Others view the figure as the Christ child, taking his first halting steps towards his destiny on Calvary. Some argue that the whirligig is a walking mill and therefore associated with the Eucharist, with the blades of the mill representing the cross. The Adoration of the Magi, completed between 1485 to 1500. Bosch's triptych of the Adoration of the Magi was once identified with a canvas executed for the Cathedral of Ecce, though it is now considered more likely that it is the painting recorded as belonging to Johann de Casembrud, which was later seized by Fernando Alvarez de Toledo, 3rd Duke of Alba, in 1567. It features the coat of arms of the Bronkhorst, the family of Casembrud's wife. Casembrud had been secretary of Lamoral, Count of Egmont, and was executed with him in 1568. Along with other forfeited works of art, the Duke shipped the triptych to Philip II of Spain, a famed collector of Bosch paintings. In 1574, the painting was in the El Escorial monastery and is mentioned in 1605 as an epiphany without any extravaganza. The triptych has been held in Madrid's Museo del Prado since 1839. When closed, the shutters display a grisaille painting of the Mass of St. Gregory in a single scene, with him kneeling at an altar in front of Christ. The latter is surrounded by an arch with flying angels. The two characters in color are a later addition and are the painting's donors. The frame above the saint concerns scenes of the life of Jesus. From the lower left, the prayer in the garden, the arrest, Christ in front of Pilate, the flagellation, the coronation of thorns, the Via Crucis, and finally, the crucifixion. In the sky around the cross, we can see a flying angel and a devil with a red halo around his head, drawing Judas Iscariot's soul away. Judas is also visible hanging by the mountain's right edge, while another figure is pointing at him. The triptych's left panel portrays St. Peter and the donor Peter Bronkhorst with the motto In Voa Al, one for all. In the background, a man sits on a basket under temporary roofing. He is most likely Saint Joseph preparing Jesus' bedclothes. The right panel presents Saint Agnes and the eponymous donor, Agnes Bosshäuser, also portrayed with her coat of arms. The background reveals a bear and a wolf attacking several citizens. The main focus is drawn to the central panel, showing the Adoration of the Magi, depicted in accordance with traditional iconography. A particularly large-sized Mary sits outside the ramshackle stable, resembling a Brabantian hut, with the Christ child held in her lap, recalling the works of Jan van Eyck. Balthasar, the eldest of the Magi, kneels at her feet with his gift before him. A golden sculpture of the sacrifice of Isaac, a hint of Jesus' passion. Below the object are several toads, serving as symbols of heresy. Balthasar's crown lies on the ground, an allusion to the powerlessness of earthly power against the celestial. Melchior stands to the rear, with a depiction of the visit of Queen Sheba to Solomon on his mantle. He bears the gift of incense on a vessel, while the last of the Magi, the dark-skinned Gaspar, is dressed in white garments decorated with embroidery resembling thorny leaves. He bears a spherical pyx with reliefs depicting the offer of water to King David, containing myrrh. A pale-skinned, partially naked figure by the hut's entrance, dressed in a red mantle and accompanied by other grotesque figures, has been variously interpreted as either another prefiguration of the Passion or intended as a symbol of the heresy intended for the followers. Other commentators have suggested the unusual figure might represent the Judaic Messiah which, after having been struck by leper, has become the Antichrist. The triptych's overall theme is the advent of salvation, conveying a message of the universality of redemption. The Eucharistic meaning indicated by the scene of St. Gregory's Mass is also found in the central panel in the wheat stored in the upper part of the hut, above the figure of the strange, partially clothed man. Bosch exerts his painting skills in the opulence of the Magi's robes and offerings, and in the depicting of the sumptuous materials also featured in the triptych. The artist's brushstroke highlights are so fine that they appear to be drawn. The city silhouetted against the clouds in the background is Bethlehem, though Bosch is carried away by his imagination, infusing the buildings with an oriental appearance. He utilizes long, thin, light strokes to sketch the main elements of the composition, though some are thicker. In the areas with modeling, his strokes are shorter, but always adapted to the size of the motif. The folds of the drapes are drawn with long strokes in a less intense color, while creases and areas of shadow are often accentuated during the paint stage.